There, hidden in the middle of a dense pine forest for over 50 years, invisible from the ground but unmistakable from the air, is a perfect swastika, not painted, not carved, not constructed, but grown, made from living trees. A 60 by 60 meter Nazi symbol created from 140 carefully planted larch trees that turn golden yellow every autumn while the surrounding pine trees remain dark green, revealing the hooked cross like a secret message from the Third Reich. For decades, this forest swastika had stood undetected through the fall of Nazi Germany, the Soviet occupation, the entire Cold War, and German reunification. Locals may have known about it, but said nothing. Soviet pilots flying overhead either didn't notice or didn't report it. The trees grew, the seasons changed, and the swastika remained, a living monument to hatred hidden in plain sight. When the discovery became public, Germany faced an embarrassing and troubling question: how many more of these are out there? And what do you do with a Nazi symbol that's literally alive? Today, we're exploring one of World War II's strangest legacies, the mystery of Germany's forest swastikas. Günther Reschke loved his native Uckermark region of northeastern Germany. He called it the Tuscany of the North for its gently rolling hills, pristine lakes, and dense forests. As a professional forester and landscaper, he spent his career protecting and studying these woodlands. In 1992, shortly after German reunification, Reschke's company was contracted to conduct an aerial survey of the region's forest to assess irrigation needs and forest health. The intern assigned to review the aerial photographs was going through them methodically when he came across photo 10688. The image showed a section of pine forest near Zernikow, but in the center there was a distinct pattern, a formation of trees that appeared lighter in color than the surrounding forest. The shape was unmistakable, a swastika. Reschke was stunned. He had lived in this region his entire life and never known this existed. He immediately investigated further. What they discovered was ingenious in its simplicity and chilling in its purpose. Someone, decades ago, probably in 1938, had planted approximately 140 larch trees in a precise swastika formation in the middle of a pine forest. The site covered about 3,600 square meters, roughly 0.89 acres. For most of the year, the swastika was completely invisible. Larch trees and pine trees look nearly identical when in full foliage, but larches are deciduous. They lose their needles in autumn, while pines are evergreen. For a few weeks every autumn and spring, the larch trees would turn bright golden yellow, then brown, before losing their needles entirely. During this color change, when viewed from above, the contrast between the yellow larches and the dark green pines created a strikingly clear and swastika shape. The design was only visible from the air at altitudes above about 1,000 feet. From the ground, walking through the forest, you'd see nothing unusual, just trees among trees. But from a plane or aerial survey, the Nazi symbol was unmistakable. The obvious question is, how did a 60 by 60 meter swastika remain undetected for over 50 years? Several factors contributed to its survival. First, the timing of visibility. The swastika was only visible for a few weeks each year, during the brief period when larches change color. Miss that window and you'd see nothing. Even aerial observers would have to be flying at the right time of year. Second, the location. The swastika was deep in rural northeastern Germany, in what became East Germany after World War II. This was not a heavily trafficked area. Private plane ownership was virtually non-existent in communist East Germany. Commercial flights didn't pass directly overhead. Third, Soviet secrecy. According to some reports, Soviet officials knew about the forest swastika but chose not to publicize it. Why draw attention to Nazi symbolism in territory they now controlled? Better to ignore it and let it fade into obscurity. Fourth, local silence. Villagers in Zernikow almost certainly knew about it. The trees had been planted in the 1930s and older residents would have remembered. But after the war, with Germany occupied and Nazi symbols outlawed, who would want to admit they knew about a giant swastika? Speaking up could bring unwanted attention, investigations, and accusations of Nazi sympathy, so people stayed quiet. The swastika became an open secret, something everybody knew but nobody discussed. Fifth, no systematic aerial surveys. Before the 1990s, comprehensive aerial photography of German forests simply wasn't common. Military aircraft flew over, but they weren't looking for tree patterns. Without systematic surveys, the swastika remained hidden in plain sight. It took German reunification, new aerial survey technology, and one observant intern to finally expose what had been there all along. Once the swastika was discovered, the next question was obvious: who planted it and why? Several theories emerged, each with its own version of events. Theory 1. Hitler. Youth commemoration. The most widely reported theory is that local Hitler Youth members planted the larch trees in 1938 to commemorate Adolf Hitler's birthday, April 20th. A local man who claimed to have been part of the Hitler Youth said his group was responsible. This makes historical sense. The Hitler Youth was heavily involved in forestry projects, outdoor activities, and displays of loyalty to the Führer. Planting a living monument that would grow and endure for generations would have been consistent with Nazi ideology about the permanence of the Third Reich. Theory 2. The Grateful Forester. The Berliner Zeitung newspaper reported that the trees were planted as a gesture of gratitude to the Reich Labor Service for building a street in Zernikow. According to this account, a Nazi forester orchestrated the planting to thank the regime for infrastructure improvements. Theory 3. A sign of loyalty under duress. A darker version suggests the swastika was planted as a forced display of loyalty after a nearby villager was taken to Sachsenhausen concentration camp for secretly listening to BBC radio broadcasts. According to this theory, villagers planted the trees to prove their allegiance to the Nazi regime and avoid further persecution. Theory 4. A local farmer's memory. 1. Local farmer claimed he planted the trees as a child in the late 1930s. A forester had paid him a few cents for each seedling he put in the ground. The farmer said he didn't fully understand what he was creating at the time. He was just following instructions and earning pocket money. The truth, we'll probably never know for certain who ordered the planting or the exact motivation. Records from that period are incomplete or destroyed. Witnesses are long dead. What we do know is that it was planted sometime around 1938 at the height of Nazi power, and it reflected the regime's obsession with symbols, propaganda, and the permanence of Nazi ideology. What makes the forest swastika particularly eerie is its intended longevity. This wasn't a banner that would be taken down or a sign that would decay. This was a living symbol designed to grow, mature, and endure for generations, perhaps centuries. The trees would outlive the planters, outlive Hitler, and continue spreading the Nazi message long after the Reich itself had fallen. It's propaganda designed for eternity. When Günter Reschke discovered the forest swastika in 1992, he faced a dilemma. As a forester who loved his region, he knew this discovery would be devastating for the Uckermark's reputation. Brandenburg was already struggling with its image. The region had become notorious for racist violence and neo-Nazi activity in the years following reunification. The last thing they needed was a massive Nazi symbol in a state-owned forest. But Reschke couldn't simply ignore it. He reported the discovery to local authorities. The reaction was immediate. Local officials were horrified. The media seized on the story. The Chicago Tribune wrote about it. International news agencies picked it up. Suddenly, tiny Zernikow was famous for all the wrong reasons. Brandenburg state authorities faced enormous pressure to do something. Nazi symbols are outlawed in Germany under Section 86A of the Criminal Code. Displaying, producing, or distributing Nazi imagery is a criminal offense punishable by up to 3 years in prison. But this wasn't a poster or a flag. This was a living forest. How do you outlaw trees? Moreover, there were concerns that if left standing, the forest swastika could become a pilgrimage site for neo-Nazis. Groups could organize clandestine visits, take photographs, and use the site for propaganda purposes. In 1995, state forestry officials decided to act. Armed with chainsaws, forestry workers made their way to the Larch copse and cut down 43 of the approximately 100 larch trees forming the swastika. They reported back to their supervisors that the symbol was now unrecognizable. The problem was solved. The commotion subsided. Everyone moved on, but the forestry workers were badly mistaken. For 5 years, everyone assumed the forest swastika had been destroyed. Then in 2000, Reuters published new aerial photographs showing a bright yellow, clearly visible swastika near Zernikow. The edges were a bit frayed, but the symbol was unmistakable. The 1995 removal hadn't worked. 57 larch trees remained, and they were still enough to form a recognizable swastika. The media response was immense, even bigger than in 1992. The fact that the symbol had survived a deliberate attempt at destruction made it an even bigger story. German officials were humiliated. The Brandenburg Agriculture Ministry announced drastic measures. They would cut down all the trees, every single larch and pine in the entire formation, to ensure the swastika could never return. But there was a problem. Ownership of approximately half the property beneath the swastika was in dispute. After reunification, some of the land had been sold into private hands. The Federal Property Administration Office, BVVG, would only authorize cutting trees on government-owned portions. State forestry officials wanted to bring down all 150 trees to eliminate the symbol forever, but they only received clearance to fell 25 trees, all on the government-owned side. On the morning of December 4, 2000, forestry workers returned to Zernikow. This time, they proceeded carefully. They selected specific trees whose removal would disrupt the swastika pattern. They cut the stumps just a few centimeters above the ground so they couldn't be seen from the air. By the end of the day, the forest swastika near Zernikow was finally, truly destroyed. But the story wasn't over. The Zernikow discovery prompted a disturbing realization. If one forest swastika had survived for over 50 years, there were probably others. Aerial surveys were conducted across Germany. Researchers pored over archival photographs. Historians interviewed elderly residents who remembered the Nazi era. They found more, many more. By the early 2010s, at least 17 additional forest swastikas had been verified across Germany, primarily in Brandenburg, Saxony, and Hesse. In the Hesse region, near a place called Asterode, researchers found not only a huge swastika on the southern slope of a spruce forest, but also the numbers 1933. The year Hitler came to power, spelled out in larch trees nearby. This pattern dated back to at least the early 1970s, when U.S. soldiers stationed in West Germany had complained to the Hesse state government after spotting it, but authorities at the time had done nothing. Most of these forest swastikas were smaller than the Zernikow formation, but they shared the same design. Larch trees planted among evergreens to create seasonal Nazi symbols visible only from the air. Some had been deliberately destroyed. Others had been disrupted by natural forest growth, logging operations, or replanting efforts that weren't even aware the symbol existed. But researchers suspect others remain undiscovered, hidden in remote forests across Germany, and possibly neighboring countries. One particularly large forest swastika was even found in Kyrgyzstan's Ekinerin forest, dating to at least the mid-20th century, raising questions about whether German POWs or Soviet officials with Nazi sympathies might have created it. According to officials, planting swastikas in forests had become a fad among National Socialist foresters during the Nazi period. It was a form of aerial propaganda intended for pilots, aerial observers, and perhaps as a long-term declaration of Nazi permanence. The forest swastikas raise a profound question that Germany has grappled with since World War II. How do you deal with Nazi relics? The case for destruction. Most German authorities and citizens support eliminating the forest swastikas for several compelling reasons. Legal requirements. Nazi symbols are illegal in Germany. Leaving them standing violates the law, preventing neo-Nazi pilgrimage sites. If forest swastikas remain, they could attract Nazi sympathizers who would use them for gatherings, propaganda photos, or radicalization, protecting community reputation. Small towns like Zernikow don't want to be associated with Nazi imagery. It damages tourism, business, and residents' quality of life. Moral imperative. Many Germans believe Nazi symbols should be eradicated wherever they're found, as a statement that such ideology will not be tolerated. The case for preservation. A smaller group of historians, preservationists, and educators argue that destroying the forest swastikas erases important historical evidence, historical documentation. The forest swastikas are physical evidence of how Nazi propaganda permeated everyday life, including forestry and environmental planning. Educational value. Preserved and contextualized, the sites could teach future generations about Nazi indoctrination methods. Counter-preservation philosophy. leaving remnants of evil, unrestored forces people to confront uncomfortable history rather than sanitizing it. Raw encounters with Nazi sites can foster deeper reflection than polished museum exhibits, preventing historical amnesia, obliterating all evidence of atrocities risks, letting people forget how pervasive and insidious Nazi ideology was. The compromise? Some suggest a middle path: preserve one forest swastika as a memorial site, properly contextualized with educational signage explaining its history, why it was wrong, and what it represents. Destroy the others to prevent neo-Nazi misuse. But Germany has largely rejected this approach. The risk of creating Nazi pilgrimage sites is simply too great. The official policy remains: when forest swastikas are found, they are destroyed. The Nazi forest swastikas remain one of World War II's strangest and most unsettling legacies. These weren't weapons, they weren't military installations. They were living symbols, trees carefully planted to spread Nazi ideology from generation to generation, designed to outlive the Reich itself and proclaim its message for centuries. The fact that the Zernikow swastika survived for over 50 years, through the collapse of Nazi Germany, Soviet occupation, the Cold War, and reunification, is both remarkable and disturbing. It demonstrates how propaganda, when embedded in nature itself, can persist long after its creators are gone. Today, the forest swastika near Zernikow is gone. The trees were cut down in 2000. The site is now just another section of pine forest in Brandenburg, indistinguishable from the surrounding woods, but questions remain. How many more forest swastikas exist, still undiscovered in remote German forests? How many were never found before natural forest cycles destroyed them? And how do we balance the need to eradicate Nazi symbols with the responsibility to preserve historical evidence? The forest swastikas remind us that propaganda isn't always obvious. It doesn't always come from posters, speeches, or flags. Sometimes it's subtle, woven into the landscape itself, waiting to reveal itself season after season. And it reminds us that even 80 years after World War II ended, we're still discovering and still grappling with the remnants of the Nazi regime's obsession with symbols, permanence, and ideological domination. The trees that formed the Zernikow swastika are gone, but the story they tell about propaganda, memory, and how we confront the darkest parts of history will endure far longer. Thank you for watching. If you found this exploration of the Nazi forest swastikas fascinating, please subscribe for more World War II mysteries and hidden histories. And let me know in the comments, should one forest swastika have been preserved as a historical site, or was destroying them all the right decision? Until next time, remember, history isn't always buried in the past. Sometimes it's growing right in front of us, waiting to be discovered.